Welcome, everyone. I'm glad we have such a great group with us here tonight, and we're happy to welcome Rabbi Sonya Starr. So Sonya has a comprehensive career of fighting for social justice in her local community and ensuring that marginalized groups have a voice. For 21 years, she was the rabbi at the Columbia Jewish Congregation, CJC, in Columbia, Maryland. During her time at CJC, she helped her congregation create a sacred arguing policy, a social justice policy, and worked on issues ranging from marriage equality to immigrant justice. She stepped down from this position to pursue full-time social justice work. Sonya joined Housing Alliance Delaware as policy director in March of 22 and has hit the ground running in championing safe and affordable housing for every Delawarean. Her social justice background, combined with her steadfast belief that housing is a fundamental human right, drive her each day in this role. So welcome, Sonya.
Thank you, and thank you all for your introductions. I really do appreciate it. So one of the things that I was taught to do in my previous life is, when possible, to educate using multiple sensories. And so for some of us, we like to see things. So I have power slides, but some of us like to ask questions and engage. And this is a small group, which is wonderful. It's an intimate group. I can actually see you on a screen, but I won't be able to see all of you once I start sharing my PowerPoints. I encourage you, if you have questions, to interrupt me, to feel free to raise your hand. Somebody else might see you and point it out to me. If I miss it, I don't mean to. But I'm hoping this is as much of a conversation as it is me talking. As Lynn shared, I have left my congregation in June of 2019, spent 7 months, which she didn't know to say, in temporary interim work as an organizer virtually in both Illinois and Pennsylvania, and then moved to Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, almost a year ago. It'll be a year and end of December, and started working in March in housing. So I'm new to Delaware, I'm new to housing, and I'm new to full-time social justice work. And I couldn't be more grateful for the gifts that life continues to give me. Part of what I want to share with you, though, is a taste of what's going on at Housing Alliance Delaware and in affordable housing, or the lack thereof, across the state of Delaware, and ending with important next steps. Probably the most important is the last slide, things that you too can be doing to get involved. And it's been really important to me. Let me state this, and then I'll start sharing and get into more of the concrete material. But it's been really important to me to reach out to the religious community in particular. I'm in a secular position at a secular organization, but my boss recognizes my background in interfaith work and has allowed this to be part of my work, which is wonderful. We all know across the country, the religious community is often the backbone of supporting people, whether it's through food drives, collection of clothes, collection of backpacks for kids at school. Code Purple in Delaware and Maryland, we called it cold weather shelter, same thing. But we haven't always taken the next step into legislative work. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you is some of the groundwork, but also the policy changes that allow us not only to feed people, but also teach them how to fish for themselves. So let me take a step back and share my screen. I want to give you an overview, a quick and dirty overview of Housing Alliance. But as I said to many people, since I've been at this job for significantly less than a year, if you hear me give an overview in a year and it's changed, that means I learned a lot. So don't hold me to everything I say we do. I want to share the annual report that we put out about homelessness and housing instability. It just came out in the last month, and it's scary. About a personal narrative project we have, a Faith in Housing Justice Weekend, a decriminalizing panhandling loitering project that we're working on, and then finally a call to action, as well as answer any of your questions. So Housing Alliance Delaware is a statewide nonprofit organization that works with people around issues of affordable housing. And we work to solve the crisis of homelessness as best as we can by building coalitions and reaching out to partners and trying to find ways either legislatively, in policy, or on the streets to really rectify the situation for people who live on the margins. We have 4 departments, one of which some of you know as 833 Find Bed. That's the number, that hotline that connects people who are homeless to shelters that are funded by HUD, which are most of the shelters in Delaware, not all, but most. It's open from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, and it is literally a matchmaker, right? We don't have beds, and we get calls and we match people to available beds. And unfortunately, there's never enough beds. But I'll come back to that when I talk about the statistics from the annual report. We have the Continuum of Care, the COC, which every state has that gets HUD money, which is every state. Many states have more than one. Delaware is so small, we have only one. We work with providers who provide services to people who are housing unstable and interested community member in supports of the needs of people who are struggling. And then the other thing we do is we collect data for HUD. If you look on HUD's site, you'll see all kinds of data about how many people are homeless, demographics of all kinds, things like that, by county, by state. We're the ones that collect that. And then we have my department, which is the Policy and Community Development Department. So as I said, we put out an annual report every year and just put out ours. According to our collection of homeless data, over 3,400 people experienced homelessness in Delaware in 2021. And it disproportionately impacts people who are Black. On the night, so once a year, we have what we call a point in time, a pit count. This year it's going to be in January. We always need volunteers to help with the pit count. We go out, well, that's a royal we. I am too old to go out between 11 and 2 in the morning, but there are we's that go out between 11 and 2 in the morning to the encampments and see how many people are actually on the street. We will be going to the shelters in the next morning and see how many people slept in shelters. But last year's pit count, we found that 61% of people experiencing homelessness were Black, 32% were white. This is in direct comparison to the statistics of the state, where 23% of Delaware's general population is Black and 68% is white. It's almost completely flipped. 1 in 3 children experiencing homelessness is under the age of 18. These 2 statistics together are probably the most scary to me. The disproportionate effect on Blacks and the disproportionate effect on children, right? We have a race problem, we have an age problem, and with children, we're creating generational poverty. The statistics of kids who grow up in homelessness and their inability to be stable, have a stable home or a stable education lends themselves to just completely relive the cycle. But in the HUD world, homelessness is a legal, almost a legal definition. It does not mean homeless as I would say it on the street. So if you have a 27-year-old who lost his apartment and is living on your couch, technically, according to HUD, that is not homeless. That's what we call overcrowded. Homelessness is somebody who's living either in a shelter or in a place that's uninhabitable, a car, a tent, on a bench, right? Somewhere where it's not meant for human habitation. They're very strict, narrow definition of homelessness. So if you include other things like overcrowding, structural damage, i.e. places that are not squatters, people who are living in places that are not licensed, have lead poisoning, which is a huge problem in Delaware, and other risks in the family, overwhelming those of lower income, that is a huge problem. And lead poisoning in itself, over 350 people each year in Delaware is identified as having high levels of lead poisoning. And we know now that lead poisoning leads to permanent learning disabilities. So people then become disabled for the rest of their lives. And lead poisoning is a problem not only in Wilmington, where we have the oldest houses, but it is across the state, including Sussex, where there are some very old houses. Because it's not only a problem of the house, it's also a problem of the pipes that take the water into our homes that have lead in them. And as we've seen in the news recently, of the schools that have drinking water that cannot be drunk. So we have not quite made national news yet because of the lead poisoning, but we're getting close. And it's something we need to be paying attention to. It is estimated by state labor laws that 55,000 people in Delaware earn minimum wage or lower. 55,000 people. Reminder, minimum wage is $10.50 an hour, which only comes to, if you work full-time work, $21,840. In order to be able to afford an apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment in Delaware, you need to be making about $42,000 a year. So you're not even making half, right, of what is necessary. And currently there are 26,430 people who are extremely low income renter households in Delaware. Only 8,282 affordable and available rental units for this population. So a discrepancy, right? You all can do math faster than I can, of over 18,000 people cannot find affordable and available apartment in Delaware, not just Wilmington. And in other words, for every third extremely low income household, there's only one available affordable rental household. There's a shortage of affordable housing. In Sussex, and there's Sussex people on the call, overcrowdingness in particular is a problem among Hispanic households that work in the poultry industry. And because as a cultural thing, they tend to double, what's called double up or couch search, but that means living in places that are made to have 5, 6 people might have as many as 15, 12 people living in it. It's not healthy. And Sussex has one of the largest growth in homelessness in the state. Sussex is also complicated. If you want me to, at the end, ask me about the differential between employment homelessness and generational homelessness, and we could talk about it because it's a real issue in Sussex in particular. But according to the census, as of July 11, 2022, 14,000 households in the state were behind in rent. 14,000. 15% of all renters are behind in rent. And among the renters behind on rent, 60% versus the 32% of color in the state, 60% are people of color. 84%, not surprisingly, are low income, and only 22% are unemployed. That means the far majority of people who cannot afford their rent are working. They're the working poor. Eviction is a big issue. It was minimized during COVID because of the laws that didn't allow it, but they have now all been lifted. And overall, 29% of all money judgments in eviction case involve amounts less than $1,000. Amounts that those of us who are upper middle class and middle class can find if we have to. Whether we have it or not, we can find it. But somebody living before can't. And one of the main gateways to homelessness for men is either prison or eviction. And for women, it's domestic violence or eviction. So prevention of eviction in both cases is a way of preventing homelessness in a very real way. So I just threw a lot of facts at you. Each one of those numbers represents a human being. And I think it's important when we look at numbers to remember there's people. And I'll say in a religious context, people made in God's image, every one of them. And they're living because our society hasn't provided a safety net that works yet. So let me stop there before I continue and ask if there are any questions, and then I'll be glad to continue. Any questions?
I guess one question is, do you have a sense, I guess, both in Delaware and nationally, how this compares to other points in time? hearing those statistics just sound like, how have we gotten here? How can it be so bad? But is this something that has been this bad all along and we just haven't been focusing on it? Has it actually gotten worse, or has it actually been improving? Like where is it relative to where it's been?
In some ways, that's a better question for my boss who knows this field inside out than for me. But what I've heard her say is that we don't know 100% the answer, because COVID was like this 3-year blip, right? We had people were all of a sudden put in hotels that were empty, right? And paid for by the government because we wanted them to be COVID safe. Now they have been expelled from those hotels, and they're on the streets again if they don't have another place. People had a moratorium on eviction that's been lifted. So it's a great question to be asking for next year, right? We had these 2-3 years where, yes, there were people who lived in horrible situations. It was markedly less because our society made a commitment for all of our health, right? I don't think we actually made that commitment for their health. I wish we did, but we made it for our health, right? Those who look like the majority of us on this call. And now we've lifted it because supposedly COVID is over. And it's really unknown what's going to happen in the next year, but there are a whole lot of people that are very scared. A whole lot of people in the field who are very scared of where we're going. Mm-hmm. So it's not a direct answer, but it gives you a little bit of the context.
Sonya, do you have a view on the Hope Center and how it's impacted this challenge in I guess Newcastle County?
So the Hope Center has a very good reputation for the way that it has been an important player in getting people off of the streets, but they also are almost always full and don't have enough beds, right? So the work they do there is important. It's well worth celebrating, but it's not enough, right? And that's true for any one of the shelters. None of them altogether are enough. Go ahead, Roger.
I'm just wondering about the lead issue. You mentioned two sources, of course. The ones we know is paint and paint chips, and lead coming from lead pipes or lead solder. I think lead solder is probably a lower issue than actual lead pipes. What kind of percentage are we talking about here? That and how do we know that it's lead? The people that are homeless are generally tested. A general broad spectrum of people are tested. How do we tie the statistics of lead as a problem into the homeless problem as a total picture?
So I was talking about housing instability in general. And in my mind, if you live in a house with lead poisoning, especially if you're a child or a pregnant woman, then you have a housing instability issue, not a homeless issue, right? So you're right. There's not a connection to people who are homeless. There's a connection to people who live in houses that are inhabitable. And the way they know the statistics right now, it's actually, there's a coalition. If you're more interested, you should get Dr. Amy Rowe to come and speak, but she can answer more of these questions. There is testing of 0 to 5-year-olds. So 0 to 5-year-olds have very little outside contact other than the household or preschool that they're in. And so their lead poisoning when they have, and it's zip code related. They have a breakdown by zip codes, and it's not surprising. It's where there's the oldest homes and the lowest income homes. What is not happening, which I think is very interesting, and I can't speak for Delaware. In Maryland, when my kids were below my knees instead of now taller than me because they're all adults, but in Maryland, they had mandatory hearing and vision testing. Do you have that in Delaware for kids? Mandatory vision in the schools? I see some shaking of yeses. We don't have, in a state that has a lead poisoning problem, we don't have mandatory lead poisoning testing. We should. There should be mandatory in kindergarten when you can catch it earlier, or preschool if you have kids at risk, right? Mandatory testing so that you can get the problem solved before they have major learning disabilities. The other thing that doesn't exist in Wilmington in particular, Wilmington requires that landlords landlords inspect homes, that they have to be approved for inspection. So in theory, not that it always works, as we know from North Adams, but in theory, if there's, you know, the heat's not working, if the stove's not working, if the toilet's overflowed, they don't get a license, they cannot rent their apartment. They do not test for lead poisoning. And there's no reason they can't. It's an easy, easy test. Just one more thing that they could test for and they don't.
Is that a city or a county or a state requirement that we have to
City.
go after?
That's a city, it's Wilmington. Unfortunately, Wilmington, and correct this, I might be wrong, so don't hold me to it, but I think Dover also has licensing of apartments, but I'm not 100% sure of this. The state as a whole does not, and there's many of us that think it should.
I mean,
There should be state licensing across the state because it's the only way to get, it's not about adding loopholes for landlords. It's about maintaining a baseline of health of the place that people in low income live in.
we know somebody involved in licensing and inspections in the city of Wilmington. I'll have to ask him what's going on there.
If you know of somebody who would be willing to talk to me, I would love a meetup, and not a mean one. I would love to learn more about licensing in Wilmington. It's something that I don't know as much about as I'd like to learn. So that would be really a gift to me.
I think I can get you that contact.
That would be really cool. Should I continue? So what we have a couple of projects going on now at Housing Alliance that I want to share with you. One of them, this one is about to be done by the end of December. So if you know of somebody who qualifies, please tell them about it quickly. And I'll send these slides to Lynn afterwards so she can share the links and for more information, because also on the one before this, our full annual report is on our website. And so I have the link on that as well. But we have this personal narrative project where we are lifting up the voices with lived experience who are homeless or evicted, housing unstable in one way or the other. People will get get paid a small honorarium, but something, and given the choice of record anonymously or reveal their identity. We are hoping to create this winter a virtual library that will be hosted on our website. We hope it's like a real library, like you go into a library and the book might not be in the building you're in, but they can borrow it from another place. So we'll have some of the videos from our surveys. We're hoping that ACLU, United Way, Homes Campaign anybody who has other videos of people who are homeless or housing unstable in a different way, will put it on there. Getting someone to change statistically, data-driven, which is, I know is a counterintuitive statement, but data-driven, people don't change their views based on their head. Statistics are really important for grants, for legislators, but people really get motivated by their hearts. And that's what changes people's opinion and moves them to action. And that comes from having people's voices from lived experience share their stories. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to really listen to the story of people who have actually walked this path. We have another project that's coming up the weekend of December 9th through the 11th. And it's an opportunity for faith communities. At this point, it's too late to add a new faith community. Maybe next year, Westminster will be able to participate. That would be amazing. We're hoping this is the first annual, but we have 7 different communities across the state of Delaware, at least one in Sussex, and the rest are all in Newcastle. Kent I was not successful in finding someone in Kent doing a different program throughout the weekend on housing instability. Think globally, act locally. So they're all doing a very different thing. But the one thing about all of them, they're all open to the public. So again, if you go to our website or you look here on this list, get this link, you can find all the listings throughout the weekend. Again, it's an attempt for the religious community to do the work it does really well at educating people, reminding them that this helping people who live on the margins is not only a nice thing to do, it is our religious mandate. It is what we are called to do. And therefore we have a responsibility to do so in a more public and coordinated kind of way. And then we have a particular project that we're working on. This is a long-term project, unfortunately. I wish it was quicker, where we're working on panhandling and loitering. Currently in Delaware, it's illegal for people to panhandle or loiter. These laws in Delaware are both unconstitutional and they perpetuate discriminatory practices. And so we are in the process of looking for plaintiffs to sue Delaware. ACLU has found a lawyer who pro bono will take on this case if we can find a plaintiff. There are two different kinds of plaintiffs. There are individuals, anybody who has been arrested, threatened with arrest in the last 2 years, moved from one street corner to the other, can be part of this suit, but they do have to make their identity public. They're a plaintiff in a court case. They cannot do it anonymous. Or if you know an organization that can show they have significant ties to people who are panhandling or loitering. Financially, maybe they pay fines for people, or they have to move their business from one corner to the next in order to find clients because the police hassle them in certain places. These kinds of organizations would also be wonderful plaintiffs. So those are three of the different projects. There are other legislative things that I can talk about as well if you want, but let me stop there and see if there's any questions about those three as well. Does that mean my time's up? I think I have. You done with me? It's like the thing pulling me off stage. So I know in the blurb that Lynn sent out, you also wanted me to talk about some of the upcoming legislation. I don't actually have a slide for that, but I could tell you what the grapevine is saying. The session hasn't started yet, and the committees have not all been assigned yet. In fact, they're not public, who the chairs will be or the composition. So it's hard for us to know 100% what will be. We have every reason to believe that right to representation will be brought back. We have every reason to believe that source of income discrimination will be brought back. There's some talk about housing stabilization. In my previous life, I would have called it rent control, but we're supposed to call it housing rental stabilization. Sorry, I'm working on my new terminology. Is going to be introduced. That's not coming back. It never was there. If we find a plaintiff, we're hoping that then legislators who were not convinced to join the fight to change Delaware's law around panhandling and loitering for the issue itself will do so because they don't want to be sued. So those are legislations that I've heard about. There will be plenty others, I'm sure, but it's a little early to know. I've been told that by March or so, we'll have a good idea what the next 2 years are going to look like. I don't know if anybody has any questions about legislation in particular that I can pretend. Go ahead, Lynn.
Well, a couple of those will increase the amount of housing that can be subsidized, which increases the pool of affordable housing. One of them may not increase the pool of affordable housing, but the right to counsel hopefully will stop some of the impact on the people from the shuffling around from place to place, which clearly helps their lives. But I still haven't heard anyone talking about dramatic ways of building out the amount of affordable housing that we need.
Right. So one of the committees, one of the coalitions I staff is the Delaware Affordable Housing Coalition. And they talk a lot about that a lot. They have some short-term and some long-term goals, but they aren't things that are liable to be in this session. So I didn't mention them, but truly to really address the issue of lack of actual units, buildings. And you're absolutely right. These things are steps in the right direction, but they're not going to solve the problem without more housing, period. We have to confront zoning. Did I say zoning? Did I say zoning? There is incredibly horrific zoning laws throughout the state of Delaware. And because they are municipal, every single municipality has control over their own zoning. That means that there's no one size fits all. Literally, if you were going to change the zoning reality in the state of Delaware, you would have to go to every single, not county, every single municipality throughout the state, of which there are too many for me to know at this point, in order to change it. And zoning is all about keeping people out and very rarely about bringing people in. And if we're going to solve the problem of affordable housing, we have to be willing, able to bring and welcome people in, right? So that's one of the issues that needs to be addressed. The second one is funding. There is no question that Delaware underfunds the building of affordable and maintaining of affordable housing. And unlike other things, it's not, first place, it's expensive, any one unit, right? You have to buy the place, you have to buy the land, you have to build it, and you're not going to get the money back, so you have to be subsidized for it. But as a colleague of mine says, you can't turn on the faucet and get the money and out pops a house, right? Because it takes years, right? You get the funding, but you have to then find a house. Did I mention zoning? And then you have to build on that place. Did I mention the rising cost of lumber and how hard it is to find construction workers right now, capacity building for builders, right? So you're talking about now, any funding that comes down now is a benefit maybe in 3 to 5 years, because that's just the reality of how developers work. So it takes the biggest obstacle, Lynn, to really building affordable housing is the lack of ability or will or capacity, I haven't figured out which, to look down the road and plan ahead. And I love living in a democracy, but by definition, democracies live until the next election cycle. If you're lucky, that's a 2-year cycle, right? That's not a 3 to 5 year cycle. And until we have a real plan that can outlast whoever's elected next and implement something down the road, all we're doing is Band-Aid. Does that kind of answer your question?
Thanks. Yeah, I think that really does sink in and tell us how tough this problem is really going to be to solve.
One of the good news is, and I should share good news, is that Delaware State Housing Authority, DSHA, is the largest public housing authority in Delaware. It's not, there's 5 of them. DSHA is the only one that's state-based, but it is not in control of all the others. They're completely independent, but it's the largest. They're doing a state-based needs assessment now. They just got the funding at the last session. So by June, they're going to announce this Delaware's needs-based, real concrete needs. And what we are advocating as a coalition is that the legislators then fund for a strategic plan for next session, right? A needs assessment without the government idea of how to fix the problem is not helpful. That's just depressing. And it's not just because we can't figure out ideas on our own. A whole bunch of the pieces of how to fix the problem will come from government agencies throughout the state of Delaware. So they have to buy into the strategic plan in order for everybody else to be able to be a piece of it. Other questions? So I am just a little bit more and then I will stop. So I love this quote by Desmond Tutu. Based on the conversation that I heard when I came on, you do too. But if you're neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. There is no neutrality when it comes to helping those who have nothing. And so I really am putting out a call to action. These are just 7 different ways that I was able to think of them, but don't underestimate number 6. I am ready and able to learn from your ideas as well. I am trying to create a network of housing advocates across the state. I have a 5 to 7 year goal of having in every single voting district in the House, in the state House, 5 to 10 housing advocates who are educated about affordable housing issues and willing to work hard to advocate for them in every single district. And take me a time to get there, but feel free to all sign up. The more people I get, the better chance I get of getting there. I am going to be teaching Advocacy 101 on February 23rd. Here's a link to register. We're going to have a daytime and an evening time session. They're exactly the same, but people who work in the day might be able to come in the evening. I am looking for a volunteer. I would give anything to have a 5-hour-a-week virtual or in Wilmington in-person volunteer who likes boring, tedious, really important work. Somebody who will help me with statistics, help me with collecting data, somebody who will help me with getting mailings out, just all of those kinds of things that we just don't have the money to hire enough staff, and any volunteers would be greatly appreciated. We're going to have the League of Women Voters has asked us to do a housing series in this winter. They're calling it Affordable Housing, the Lack Thereof. The first session in January is going to be about a national perspective on housing. In February, we're going to talk about, those people won't be me because there'll be people who have been living and working in the housing field for a very long time. So they'll really be able to answer your questions on housing across Delaware. In March, we're going to have people with lived experience, and in April, we're going to have a long discussion about next steps. And then we, every year in May, have a day for housing. When we ask people to come all at once, I don't know yet the date. It will be a Thursday. That cuts it down in May. Come to Dover and make it clear that the constituents care about housing. But like I said, I have a lot to learn. And if you have other ideas, please do not hesitate to contact me. And Housing Alliance, like any other nonprofit, only can do so much. Most of our money is actually tied up with grants from HUD, which means that we have very little discretionary fund. When you all do a gift and make a donation, you give us discretionary fund to do things like the legislators' breakfasts that we're having that have incredible impact, but aren't things that HUD will fund. And my contact information. I really hope you reach out. So that's my slide deck. Like I said, afterwards, I'll send it to Lynn so she could share it however she chooses with all of you and or on the website for the people who will watch it later on, however you feel comfortable doing that. But now I'm open to listen to questions, comments, thoughts, whatever you like. Fran, please.
Are you going to send that contact information out to us? And
I think that's a question for Lynn.
Oh, okay.
So
Lynn,
anyone who's not part of the Peace and Justice Work Group distribution list, if you don't regularly hear from us, please put your email in the chat, and that way I will add you to the specific follow-up email from tonight's session.
oh, okay.
And I will put in I'll just put my email as well in the chat so you have it. I gave it to Lynn by accident.
And I have Fran Hassan and Fran Carnes's email addresses because of our postcard work, but
Okay, would you include us then, Sue?
sure, absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Please, Sue, you had a question.
Sonya, the Advocacy 101 on February 23rd, is that in person or virtual?
It's virtual. One of the gifts of COVID is really magnifying the use of virtual. I do think there's a loss, and we actually just did a strategic plan in person. It was so nice to see people in 3D, but because we're a state-based organization, anything that we do like that is almost always virtual because it's the only way to really get everybody from across the state involved.
Well, actually, I'm traveling then, so the fact that
Yeah,
it's
you can still
virtual is
join.
a good thing. Is a good thing.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Our Urban Mission Group has supported Family Promise for a long time. Does the Housing Alliance have a relationship with Family Promise? And if so, how does that operate?
So Family Promise is one of those providers that gets money from HUD. So we have a very good relationship with Family Promise and Tyler Shade. And in fact, I met, yesterday to talk about panhandling and loitering. He's going to start trying to see if any of his clients might be willing to be plaintiffs in our lawsuit. They, like all of the shelters, are incredibly amazing, doing wonderful work. Them in particular just got a nice donation that they are about to build another home, which is wonderful. They're quite a good group, and I know that a lot of the religious organizations in the New Castle area work through them, through I don't know if it's still officially Code Purple through them, but work through them as part of your mission, which is great. They're a really good group.
I have a question about affordable housing
Please.
for people really at, I mean, you've got shelters, which is not affordable housing, right? And then what's the model for affordable housing?
I'm sorry, say that again. What's the
Model? I mean, how I mean, when you think back, I'm from New York City, and you think of the projects and how that was well intended but didn't work. What's the model in Wilmington? Two things. One, in terms of financing, the public component and the private component, if there is a private component, and then in terms of everything from where and I know what they're trying to do over like Reach Riverside and that area, and that seems great. And it's is that the model, or are there multiple models? And you see what I mean?
I get the question, and I'm feeling a little inadequate. Come in February, because they will know the answer to that question really well. I'll give a preliminary answer, but don't hold me 100% to it. A little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. One of the problems is that all kinds of people are vying for limited funding, right? So when you're vying for limited funding, you're competing, good things are competing against good things. So do we need shelters? Yes. But should shelters really be the way we spend our money to solve homelessness? Probably not. And so you're caught, right? So people put in money in shelters because they don't like seeing people on the streets. I don't like seeing people on the streets. So you put them away in a shelter. But shelters don't end homelessness. They just get them off the street. It's not the same, right? So there is a model of permanent supportive housing and temporary supportive housing. Temporary supportive housing is, Family Promise is an example of temporary supportive housing. If you know about Friendship House, that's another example of temporary supportive housing. They're usually up to 2.5. West End has temporary supportive housing for youth. 2.5 years of housing with all kinds of wraparounds, psychological, financial, school, right? Whatever that person might need to get stable. The goal of temporary supportive housing is they eventually work their way out of needing it. And that works for the population that has the capability to work their way out of it. The problem is that there are mental health issues that we as a society have not found cures for or treatments for. There are traumas that we as a society have not invested in enough treatment of. And so there is a need for permanent supportive housing that Delaware has a very, very small amount of. What my boss has said, so now I'm channeling Rachel, hopefully I get it half right. She has said that we should be putting more money into permanent supportive housing and less into shelters, because a permanent supportive housing can be temporary, like a shelter, or it can be permanent if that's what the person needs. And it gives them the stability with all of the wraparounds to negotiate and figure out where to. The other piece of all of this is whether you believe in what's called low barrier or high barrier entry into housing. And there's a lot of controversy on. So this would be an amazing debate, because there's a whole lot of controversy. And what's the controversy? Should you be doing what's called housing first, which means no matter what, somebody's using, somebody's drunk, somebody's unemployed, they get housing. And the theory for housing first is you give people an address so somebody can find them. You give people shelter so they can think and sleep at night, you then have access to bring resources to them, right? You have data-driven more success in getting people out of homelessness and out of crisis if you let them into housing first. There's the other side of the argument is that we don't take people who are drunk and we don't take people who are high, right? And there are definitely shelters that in Delaware that have that theory. There are temporary supportive housing places that have that theory. The argument being, we don't want to enable you. We don't want to be codependent, right? We want you to get your blank together and work for this. The question becomes, do you think of housing as a right or do you think of housing as a privilege? If you think of housing as a right, even those people who have mental health serious mental health illnesses that they self-medicate for deserve a house, right? If you think of it as a privilege, well, then you have to work for it and you have to earn it. And that's part of the debate that's going on in our state. So that's a really oversimplified answer to a very complex question, Louis. But that's the beginnings, at least give you some of the thoughts that are going around, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it did. The other thought or sort of question I had about this is when you have because it's the next level, and it's what you talked about in terms of the working poor renting, and you may not know this, but is the rental market that's generally available to the working poor, is it mostly private, or is there government rental housing or some combination? Because
there is government rentals. There are government rentals, if that's what you're, yes, there are public housing authorities that rent, for sure. They're vouchers, which get people out of ghettos and into the larger community because the government will pay for the voucher anywhere. Trick is getting a landlord that will take the voucher, yeah. but that there are vouchers. But the problem really is that, so the other group that I staff is the Delaware Community Development Network, in which you see housing as a piece of the whole community. And they would argue, rightfully, that you'll have a crisis as long as minimum wage is $10.50, right? Yeah. As long as a full-time salary, I mean, I can't even imagine how anybody tries to make ends meet, right? On minimum wage. And yet we allow people to work full-time on minimum wage, many of whom only work 29, 30, 32 hours so they don't get benefits. And that's considered acceptable. Until we change that, we've created the chaos that people are stuck in, right?
Yeah, it seems to me, I agree with that completely. It seems to me, you either pay people more, either directly or through some
or indirectly
vouchers,
right,
so that they can afford what's out there. There is enough out there, or you make the housing cheaper, through subsidies at that level.
Right. Now you mentioned the working poor, and so I'll go back to what I mentioned in Sussex as a teaser, even though you didn't bring it up. But Sussex has a real issue with what's called employment homelessness. Why? Because of two industries. This is a perfect, though, example of what we were just talking about. They have two industries that support the middle and upper middle class. One, the hospitality industry. Two, the poultry industry. We all like our chicken, right? Both of them are in Sussex. 10,000 people work in the poultry industry in Sussex. 10,000 people doing work most native-born Americans do not want to do at all. Most are Hispanic or Asian, new immigrants. Most are tripled up, never mind doubled up, right? And in the hospitality, our waiters, our waitresses, our clerks, none of them are making anything more than minimum wage whatsoever, and can't afford to live anywhere near where they work on the east side, right on the coast. And there's no public transportation to get them from the west side to their work. And many are homeless across the board, especially in the poultry industry. Across the border in Maryland and Virginia, homeless there getting resources while they come to work in Delaware. It's scary and it's frightening, and we have got to take responsibility for each of our pieces in making that happen, right? Lynn, I've been talking too much, sorry. Never give a rabbi a mic. Go ahead.
No, that's good because you have touched on, in some ways, both the things that I wanted to bring up. So I think you've covered it a lot already. But going back to the vouchers, it's my understanding, and some of this could be wrong, that part of the issue is that the federal government even provides a lot of money towards these housing vouchers, but those vouchers, or the money for the vouchers that comes to Delaware, is not all even being used. I know after the Ida hurricane, I was going onto the HUD websites and stuff, and Delaware had the least utilization rate of any state in the country in terms of those vouchers, which was really disheartening to see that there were federal funds available that were not getting utilized. And I think part of that goes to the legislation that you described earlier, which would require landlords to accept housing vouchers or provide
Correct.
incentives for them to accept them. Because right now there are there are vouchers out there, but not, private landlords who will accept the vouchers. So they're not.
15-month average wait for somebody to get an apartment with a voucher. 15 months, where are you supposed to live for 15 months until you find a landlord, they'll take your voucher, right? And just to be clear, and I'm sorry I interrupted you, and go ahead.
No, please continue.
Just to be clear, source of income is cloaked racism. Okay, it is very clear that it is a way of not renting to Black and brown people, and not saying that you're not renting to Black and brown people, because the majority of people with source of income vouchers in Delaware are Black and brown people. It is cloaked racism. And so technically, we're not requiring every landlord. This is important if you're ever talking to a landlord. They are not required to take if this legislation passed, to take a voucher. They are required not to discriminate because someone has a voucher. If somebody has been evicted and they don't rent to evicted people, they don't have to rent to them. If somebody destroyed the previous property, they don't have to rent to them. But if everything else is equal, they cannot use the voucher as an excuse not to rent to them.
Right. But still, what it says is there are a lot of available federal dollars out there
Correct.
that are not being utilized in Delaware. And that just seems like, something that we have to quickly, some of these things, you're right, are going to take longer term planning that we ought to be able to do something about rather quickly to not let dollars go to waste. And the other thing that you already touched on is the whole, there are two ways to come at this. One is to provide additional affordable housing, but if most of that means coming up with ways to subsidize the building of it and or the subsidizing of ongoing paying for it and stuff, is that the best way of doing that? Or, as you were starting to say, we work on the other side in terms of the income side. And that has the advantage of, right now, you could say, well, housing costs too much, they can't afford it. You could also say healthcare costs too much, they can't afford it. There are multiple things that cost too much. The problem is that in aggregate, they can't afford it on the small incomes that are provided. And so is it a simpler way to solve the problem to come at it from the income side? Because then it doesn't just help you solve the housing problem, but also the healthcare problem. It helps you solve multiple problems and let the capital markets do their thing and stuff if we just address the other piece, which I know is also complex. I understand that just simply raising minimum wage to the $23 an hour living wage is not as simple as
Right. So I don't know about if it's either or. I think reality is it's probably either and, right? It's probably both. And above my pay grade, which is easier in Delaware, I'm not been here long enough to know the answer to that. I heard that there was a whole lot of debate about just getting it to 15 and another 3 years. It's going to be at 15 or something, 2 or 3 years, at which point it'll be out of date by then. So that was a huge fight. So I don't know which is easier. But I want to go back to something you said about landlords, and I meant to say this and I forgot, so thank you for reminding me. I think this is a place where religious communities can have a real help. I know, well, I don't know Westminster. I know my synagogue, Beth Shalom, has plenty of landlords in the pews, right? They're landlords who are members. I can't believe Westminster and that very nice building you all have don't have landlords who are members, right? We should be talking to the landlords in our religious communities about it's not just about religion on Sunday. And maybe we do something to help subsidize them. Maybe we do something as a religious community to say, I'm making this up, but for every 3 landlord that's willing to take on a new affordable housing client, we will be there to do what's necessary to support that person. I'm making that up, but that we have access to landlords. We can be doing that in our own communities. I am a firm believer in thinking globally, acting locally. They are the people there sitting next to you, right? We have just started in Housing Alliance. We don't have many people, but we have just started a coalition of landlords who are willing to rent affordable housing to people who are on low income. And if you know of any landlords who would like some support, like to ask some questions, like to get best practices, who are thinking about it or interested in it, please let me know, because you're right. That's something we can do now. Norm or Judy, I don't know which one. Both your names are up.
Thank you very much, Sonya, for what you said. I have a piece of paper here that was a part of a keynote speech at the University of Delaware in 2008 by William B. Chandler III, who was Chancellor of the Court of Chancery of the state of Delaware, both are highly respected judges in the United States. And it goes on, but he had one paragraph here I thought was very much related to what you said.
Mm-hmm.
He said, perhaps the most startling effect is the bifurcation of our democracies. As the demand for property increases, so does the price. And Sussex and Kent counties are fast becoming 2-class worlds with a vast chasm between the classes. Wealthy who retire here or vacation here or who profit from the development here, and the rest of them who serve them. The result in communities increasingly divided by economic status. One of the blessings of rural county of Sussex County of my youth was that poor families and what passed for wealthy families inhabited largely the same society. We went to school together, we shopped together, we worshiped together, and we worked together. The rapid growth of Sussex County has not been kind to this tradition. Though the population influx has created jobs, most are low-paying and low-skilled with little chance for advancement. Increasingly, locals can't afford to live in the towns where they grew up. This financial stratification is reminiscent of the segregated society of the past and unwholesome situation to which we should not wish to return.
Amen. Absolutely. I wouldn't let Newcastle off so easy. When I first moved here, I said to my boss, well, I walk to 2nd and 4th Street. Like, I live in the Highlands, right? I literally can walk less than a mile away is some of the worst, not the worst in Wilmington, but some pretty serious poverty on 4th and 2nd Street. But in my mind, they all would go to school together, right? I mean, it's less than a mile away, wouldn't they? And she said, oh, they don't go to school together. Those who could afford to go to private school, Sonya. That's a bifurcation, if I ever heard of one, right? We have opted out of that community system that makes us all part of one community. Please, Roger. Pastor, right?
I did put a direct message to you, a contact at the city of Wilmington.
Thank you.
I think he's in code enforcement, but he can direct you where your question might go.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Sonya, I've been asked to ask a question from Fran, whose mic isn't working, I think. And she says that Springboard Collective is about to open 40 pallet homes in Georgetown. 1 year housing, I guess, with services. What are your thoughts on pallet homes as part of a solution?
Right. So it's been a really interesting debate listening to the whole debate about the pallet shelters. So the pallet, remember when I was talking about housing first versus you have to do something to get in? So the pallet shelters in Georgetown were basically created for one particular encampment that's in Georgetown, right? That's an old encampment and they want to get them off the streets. And they are making it high barrier. You have to be, well, there it's mixed. It's not so clean. You don't have to be clean in the sense of not using, but you can't bring in alcohol and you can't bring in drugs. So therefore you have to leave to get your alcohol and drugs. You can be high or drunk, but you can't, right, bring it in on the property. Most of us would say, well, of course, I don't want it in my house. That makes sense. My boss is really scared that that's going to increase the amount of overdoses. Statistically, people who are allowed to use, whether it's alcohol or legal or alcohol is a legal drug, whether it's a legal or illegal drug, right? Use in the place they live are less likely to take huge amounts and therefore they don't OD. People who have to go off the premises to get it and can't bring it on are going to take a huge dose. And she thinks that we're going to increase the amount of overdoses. On the other hand, they're under locking. Everybody gets their own lock and key. They have their own place. They can lock it at night. They're outside of the, they're inside. They don't get hit by rain, snow. It's better than living in a tent. And then on the third hand, because I know you don't have third hands, but the showers and the bathrooms are not in each pallet shelter. So you literally have to go outside to go to the bathroom. On the other hand, if you're in a tent, you're going outside too. So I don't think they're bad things. I don't think they're the perfect solution either. I think they're complicated. But what they are is they are the cheapest and quickest way to get things up quickly. So they're better than being in an encampment. And if people will take advantage of the services that are brought to them or able to access them, they're a step in the right direction.
Thank you.
What's your take on tiny houses?
Well, the pallet shelters are tiny houses.
Permanent,
right,
I mean,
permanent tiny houses.
Self-contained. Yes.
So it's funny when part of I have a 19-year-old who still lives with me, and we spent COVID when he wasn't quite 19 watching a lot about teeny homes. Some of those teeny homes are not affordable, right? Teeny home, just because it's a tiny home doesn't make it an affordable home. Some of them are very nice. And they also have to be on a particular land, right? The teeny homes are really cute in the TV show because they get put on a truck and they move around and all that kind of stuff. But if you're really looking at affordable housing, they have to be land-based, right?
Right.
And if you looked at the tornadoes that just hit our country, you might notice that RVs, never mind teeny homes, didn't do so well. So they have to be in some way weather safe, right, from the outside weather. Now tornadoes might not be a Delaware issue, but hurricanes can be. And they're not always so easy. So absolutely, I think it's a complex problem. I think the teeny homes can be made more affordable. I think the pallet shelters are teeny homes. I think that there's ways of doing that, but you have to look at all the complexity. It is not an easy puzzle to fix. I once had a therapist when my kids were in therapy, and I was complaining about my task. I was asking my kids was so easy to do. Why weren't they doing it? And he said to me, Sonya, if it really was easy, they would have done it by now. So my guess is the solving affordable housing, if it really was easy, we would have done it by now. Go ahead.
Well, and there's no question that it is a nationwide problem because there isn't a city in the country where someone making minimum wage, working even full-time, can afford a 2-bedroom rental apartment. And so I think there's a fundamental question about what is our belief about our neighbor, about our fellow human beings, and what are we called to do? And that's something particularly as a church, as religious institutions, should be at the top of our list of questions in terms of who are we, whose are we, and what are we doing to see that the concept of we are all children of God is indeed lived out in our actions and our priorities. So thank you for this, Sonia. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. If I can add one other biblical text, I've been thinking about the Deuteronomy passage, which I'm not going to remember the chapter number verse right now. I apologize. Where in the same paragraph, we're told that we should never clench our hands to the needy, right? We should always open our hand to the needy. And then it says, and the needy will always be with us, right? We don't get to decide who's worthless. We don't get to decide who's cost effective to help as a religious faith-based group. We don't get to decide that. We're commanded to always keep our hand open and to be helping whether the problem ever disappears or not. Lynn?
Yes, although we do let ourselves run over 8 o'clock, we have previously set an arbitrary 8:15 cutoff to say we will not keep it going past then. So I'll say if anyone has a question they really wanted to get out, now's your last chance because it's 8:12. But also I'll say, Sonya, if you want to end on a repeat of how we can get involved and help, I'll let you finish out there if there's no one else that has it. Oh, Mike, I think, has one last question.
Go ahead. I'm just while you ask your question, I have the call to action up. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike. Did I see you raising your hand?
Perhaps not.
Okay. All right, go ahead, Sonya.
We need your help. It takes a village. It takes every single one of us. We need advocates who are willing to educate themselves and put themselves out with legislators. We need people who are willing to volunteer, especially those who have reached the privilege of retirement and have the capability. We need people who are willing to come up with creative, out-of-the-box solutions that we haven't thought of. And we need financial resources to do the work that we're doing. I am not old enough to retire no matter how many gray hairs I need. And so I love my salary. I am not going to work my way out of it yet. So we need to be able to figure out how to give our nonprofits the resources to do the work we ask of us. So I hope that this is an ongoing dialogue. I would love to see you all in different places at different times. And you have my email. If there's anything else I can do, please let me know.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Everyone have a great evening, and I will follow up with an email to all of you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Thanks for being here, all of you.